Have you ever wondered why we work the way we do? How have external forces influenced us to follow certain patterns without questioning them? In this video, we will explore Carl Jung's ideas on manipulation in the workplace. We will uncover how social and psychological structures shape us to meet expectations that often go against our well-being. Get ready to question what you think you know about work and discover how we can free ourselves from these influences, taking control of our professional lives. It's time to look beyond the surface and understand the invisible forces that drive us. The concept of the collective unconscious was one of Carl Jung's most revolutionary contributions to modern psychology. This term describes a deep layer of the human mind that doesn't belong to the individual but is shared by all of humanity. Within the collective unconscious reside archetypes, universal images that influence our behaviors, decisions, and values without us being fully aware of them. Among these archetypes are those that have glorified work since ancient times, shaping our relationship with productivity and duty. One of the most notable examples of how the myths present in the collective unconscious have shaped our perception of work is the Greek myth of Prometheus. Prometheus was the titan who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity, providing the essential tool for civilization, the knowledge and ability to transform the environment. However, this act came with an eternal punishment. Prometheus was chained to a rock where an eagle ate his liver every day. What does this myth symbolize from a Jungian perspective? It represents the struggle, sacrifice, and inherent pain of work, as well as the glorification of effort as a virtue. Work, seen as the ability to transform reality, becomes a heroic duty that demands constant sacrifice. This archetype has evolved throughout history. During the Industrial Revolution, work was reinterpreted as a moral obligation and a source of identity. Christian values that promoted sacrifice and obedience merged with the growing need for an obedient and productive workforce. Suddenly, not working or being unproductive became a sin, a reflection of moral weakness. This notion, deeply embedded in the collective unconscious, continues to operate today. Work is no longer just an economic necessity. It has become a source of personal identity and value. This phenomenon is so profound that when a person loses their job, they not only face an economic crisis, but also an identity crisis. Questions like, "Who am I without my work?" emerge from the collective unconscious, which has conditioned our psyche to associate our worth with our productivity. But this drive to work doesn't always come from material needs. We often work more hours than necessary or take on projects that overload us, not for the money, but because the collective unconscious has conditioned us to see work as inherently virtuous. The myth of heroic sacrifice present in cultures worldwide has manipulated us into believing that constant effort is the only way to live a meaningful life. Unfortunately, this myth also alienates us from our true nature. By focusing solely on work, we lose connection with ourself, the deepest part of our being that seeks self-realization beyond external achievements. Over-identifying with work and productivity can lead to emotional burnout, chronic stress, and a sense of emptiness because the human soul cannot be nourished solely by material production. For Jung, the path to freedom begins with recognizing these archetypes and their influence on our lives. By becoming aware of how the collective unconscious shapes our beliefs about work, we can begin to dismantle these internal structures and seek more balanced ways of relating to our obligations. It's necessary to question whether we are truly working to fulfill our own desires and needs, or if we are simply responding to the expectations imposed by society and culture. The archetype of the ideal worker is one of the most powerful tools of social control that has shaped our relationship with work. Unlike the mythical heroes, this archetype is not a glorious figure from ancient mythology, but a modern social construct that sets a behavioral model to which everyone is expected to aspire. According to Carl Jung, archetypes are patterns of behavior inherent in the human psyche that deeply influence our decisions and perceptions, and the ideal worker is one of the most influential in the context of work. This archetype presents an image of the perfect worker, disciplined, productive, efficient, and obedient. The ideal worker doesn't question orders, doesn't seek immediate rewards, and above all, values work above other aspects of life such as leisure or personal relationships. From childhood, through education and social institutions, we are ingrained with the idea that we must aspire to this ideal. We are told that success depends on our ability to adapt to this model, arriving early, working harder than others, sacrificing our free time, and never complaining. The origin of this archetype can be traced back to the Protestant work ethic, which popularized the idea that effort and personal sacrifice are indicative of moral virtue. According to this perspective, hard work is not only necessary for economic survival, but it is also a path to spiritual redemption. As capitalism and industrialization expanded, this archetype was shaped to meet the needs of corporations and governments, becoming an effective tool for maintaining social order. In the modern world, the archetype of the ideal worker has evolved to align with the demands of global capitalism. Today, workers are expected not only to fulfill their duties, but also to be available 24/7, thanks to technology that enables remote work. The hustle culture is glorified, where working more hours than necessary is seen as a sign of success. Social media and the media promote the image of entrepreneurs and executives who dedicate all their time to work, creating constant pressure for everyone to conform to this ideal. However, what many people do not recognize is that this archetype is a form of psychological manipulation. By internalizing the archetype of the ideal worker, people become their own supervisors, punishing themselves when they fail to meet the impossible standards imposed by society. This phenomenon is visible in the rise of mental health issues related to work stress, burnout, and depression from success. A form of hopelessness that arises when people achieve work success, but discover that it does not fill the emotional or spiritual void in their lives. Furthermore, this archetype is also a tool that reinforces power structures. Companies and institutions benefit when workers adopt this ideal, as productivity increases while demands for well-being or work-life balance decrease. The ideal worker doesn't complain, doesn't demand change, and fits into a system that favors those at the top of the hierarchy. Jung argued that in order to free ourselves from this archetype, we need to confront it consciously. We must ask ourselves whether we truly wish to follow this work model, or if we are merely responding to expectations conditioned by society and culture. Individuation, the process of integrating all parts of the self, including the dark side of our psyche, is essential for breaking free from these archetypes that enslave us. This involves recognizing that our worth is not determined by how many hours we work or how many accomplishments we accumulate, but by our ability to live authentically and in balance. One of the most fundamental concepts in Jung's theory is that of complexes, clusters of unconscious thoughts, emotions, and perceptions that revolve around a central theme. These complexes act as autonomous entities within our psyche, influencing our decisions and behaviors, often without us being fully aware of them. In the context of work, the success complex is one of the most dominant and dangerous, as it subtly shapes our identity and relationship with work. From an early age, many people grow up believing that their personal worth is closely tied to their ability to succeed in the workplace. Parents, teachers, and society at large reinforce the idea that achievement equals worth. This conditioning is so strong that it becomes an unconscious complex, meaning that even when we achieve success, we do not feel true satisfaction because we are seeking external validation that never arrives. The success complex operates under a compensation principle. Instead of focusing on personal growth or the pursuit of an authentic vocation, many people work tirelessly to avoid failure, which they see as a direct threat to their identity. This complex manifests in behaviors such as perfectionism, overworking, and the inability to disconnect from work. It pushes us to constantly seek external recognition, whether through promotions, raises, or applause from colleagues. This complex also feeds a larger cultural narrative in which success is presented as the ultimate goal of life. Social media, the media, and success stories in business reinforce the idea that we must always strive for more money, more power, more prestige. The problem is that when we become trapped in this cycle, our identity becomes an extension of our work, which leaves us vulnerable to emotional and physical burnout. One of the clearest manifestations of this complex is the fear of failure. For many people, failure is not just a temporary disappointment, it is an existential threat. Failure activates the success complex, making us feel useless, ashamed, and even unable to move forward. This fear of failure can lead to self-destructive behaviors, such as overworking, neglecting our own emotional needs, and the inability to enjoy the present moment. For Carl Jung, the only way to free ourselves from this complex is through awareness. When we bring these unconscious patterns into the light of consciousness, we can begin to dismantle them. Individuation, which involves integrating all parts of our psyche, including those we have repressed or denied, is key to overcoming the success complex. This means accepting that our value does not depend on our external achievements, but on our ability to live an authentic and meaningful life. By becoming aware of this complex, we can begin to redefine our relationship with work. Instead of viewing success as the ultimate goal, we can start valuing the process and the human connections we build along the way. This does not mean we should reject work or achievement, but rather that we need to find a balance between work and our emotional, spiritual, and personal lives. When we recognize that work is just a part of who we are, we can begin to free ourselves from the control that the success complex has over our identity. Transference is another key concept in Carl Jung's psychology. This phenomenon occurs when we project unconscious emotions and conflicts onto others or situations. Although Jung primarily explored this concept within the context of the therapeutic relationship, transference also plays an important role in the workplace. At work, we tend to project our unresolved emotional needs onto colleagues, bosses, or subordinates, creating complex and often dysfunctional power dynamics. One of the most common examples of transference at work is the projection of parental figures onto our superiors. Many people unknowingly seek from their bosses the recognition, approval, or even affection they may not have received from their parents. This can lead to unequal power relationships in which employees feel emotionally dependent on the approval of their superiors. This type of transference not only affects productivity, but can also be detrimental to mental health, as it creates an emotional dependency that goes beyond mere work relationships. Another form of transference in the workplace is competition between colleagues, often based on unresolved unconscious conflicts from childhood. For example, an employee might project onto their coworker the rivalry they felt with a sibling during childhood, which can lead to jealousy, resentment, and unnecessary conflicts within the team. These conflicts not only damage the work environment, but can also hinder personal and professional growth. Transference can also manifest in extreme self-expectations that many people impose on themselves at work. Instead of viewing work as a task, some people see it as a battlefield where they must constantly prove their worth. This is a form of transference in which individuals project their own fears and insecurities onto the workplace, making work a means to overcome those unresolved emotions. What makes transference particularly problematic in the workplace is that people are often unaware it is happening. They believe their emotions and behaviors are rational and justified when in reality they are being guided by unconscious forces that have nothing to do with the work itself. This lack of awareness can lead to toxic workplace relationships where people feel trapped in power dynamics that seem out of their control. The solution, according to Jung, is to make these transference dynamics conscious. When we realize that we are projecting our unconscious emotions onto others, we can begin to take steps to correct these patterns. This involves a process of self-knowledge and deep reflection, where we identify the sources of our internal conflicts and learn to manage them in a healthy way instead of projecting them onto work. By addressing transference in the workplace, we can begin to build healthier, more balanced relationships, both with our colleagues and with ourselves. This not only improves productivity, but also allows us to work in an environment that fosters personal and professional growth, rather than perpetuating unhealthy power dynamics. One of the most powerful concepts that manipulates our relationship with work is the myth of progress. This myth suggests that success is always within reach, and if we work hard enough, we will eventually achieve a better life, more financial stability, more social recognition, and more personal power. This myth has been deeply internalized in the collective psyche, reinforced by generations of success stories, from folk tales to the biographies of billionaires. The myth of progress is not just an incentive to work harder, it also creates a constant expectation of upward movement. It teaches us that hard work is the only path to a fulfilling and successful life, and that those who fail to rise in the social or professional hierarchy simply haven't worked hard enough. This narrative has been perpetuated by institutions such as schools, businesses, and governments, which benefit from a motivated workforce always willing to make sacrifices in the name of success. This myth is reflected in the way people orient their lives. From a young age, we are taught that progress is linear, that if we study hard, we will get a good job, and if we work hard enough in that job, we will eventually be promoted, earn more money, and gain more power. However, this idea that hard work guarantees success is a dangerous illusion. Many people work tirelessly for years without achieving the progress they were promised, which can lead to feelings of frustration, alienation, and burnout. Carl Jung suggested that this myth is deeply rooted in the collective unconscious, in which myths of heroes and epics have reinforced the idea that struggle and sacrifice are the only paths to success. In ancient times, heroes embarked on arduous journeys to obtain glory or redemption. Today, modern heroes are successful entrepreneurs or executives of large corporations whose stories are told as examples of how hard work can transform a person's life. However, Jung also warned about the dangers of this myth of progress. For him, true progress is not material, but internal. Working harder and achieving more material things does not necessarily lead to greater personal fulfillment or happiness. In fact, many of the patients Jung treated in his practice were successful in external terms, but deeply unhappy internally. They had dedicated their lives to pursuing external goals, but found themselves empty inside, disconnected from their true nature and purpose. The myth of progress can also become a psychological trap. It pushes us to think that we always need more money, more success, more recognition. This can lead us to an endless spiral of work, where we are never satisfied with what we've achieved and always seek the next goal. As a result, we sacrifice our relationships, emotional well-being, and physical health in the name of progress, without stopping to ask ourselves whether we are truly moving towards something that holds meaning for us. To free ourselves from the manipulation of this myth, Jung suggests that we must redefine what progress means. Instead of focusing on external success, we need to focus on internal growth. True progress is not in the accumulation of wealth or power, but in the ability to know ourselves and live according to our authentic needs and desires. This involves questioning the social and cultural norms that tell us we must always be moving, always advancing and learning to value rest, contemplation, and balance. One way to begin challenging this myth is by redefining our personal goals. Instead of pursuing success based on society's terms, we can ask ourselves what we truly want from life. Do we want more money and power? Or are we seeking a life richer in meaningful experiences, authentic connections, and inner peace? By shifting our focus from external progress to internal growth, we can start freeing ourselves from the need to work relentlessly and find ways of living that bring us greater satisfaction and well-being. In his work, The Reality of the Soul, Carl Jung explored how excessive work and obsession with productivity can lead to a profound alienation from our inner being, or what he called the self. This alienation is one of the highest prices we pay for following the dictates of a society that values work above all else. In the modern world, we are taught that our identity is closely tied to our ability to produce, achieve, and accumulate. But what happens when we focus so much on work that we lose sight of who we really are? The self, according to Jung, is the core of our psyche, the center of our wholeness as individuals. It is the place where our deepest desires, our life purpose, and our true nature reside. However, modern society has disconnected us from this self by making us believe that our value is determined by our economic contributions and not by our capacity for self-realization. As a result, many people find themselves trapped in jobs that provide no sense of purpose or meaning, but feel compelled to continue doing them because they fear losing their status, salary, or sense of identity. This disconnection from the soul can manifest in many forms: anxiety, depression, chronic stress, burnout, and a sense of emptiness that cannot be filled with more work or material success. Often, this emptiness expresses itself in an existential crisis, where people begin to question the meaning of their lives and the purpose of their work. Jung argued that this emptiness is a sign that the self is being ignored and that the psyche is crying out for attention. However, instead of listening to these signals, society pushes us to keep going, to work harder, to distract ourselves with external achievements rather than confront our inner discontent. The obsession with productivity not only disconnects us from ourself, but it also alienates us from our relationships and from nature itself. When we are too focused on work, we neglect our connections with others, with the community, and even with the natural environment. This alienation leaves us alone, isolated, and disconnected from what truly matters in life. Jung believed that connection with nature and other people was essential for psychological well-being, and that excessive work robbed us of these vital connections. Moreover, alienation from the self can lead us to an endless cycle of dissatisfaction. When we ignore our deepest needs in favor of productivity, our soul reveals itself, and we begin to feel increasingly unsatisfied no matter how much success we achieve. This dissatisfaction, instead of leading us to reflect on our true needs, often pushes us to work even harder in a desperate attempt to find satisfaction. But the truth is, the soul cannot be nourished by material achievements. It needs meaning, purpose, and authenticity. For Jung, the path to healing begins with reconnecting with the self. This involves taking the time to reflect on what we truly want from life, rather than simply following society's expectations. It also involves valuing rest and contemplation, things that the culture of productivity often despises. Instead of seeing free time as a waste of time, Jung believed it was essential for our mental and spiritual health. Only when we give ourselves time to be silent and turn inward can we begin to heal the alienation from the self. The key to overcoming this alienation is finding a balance between work and personal well-being. Work is an important part of life, but it should not be the sole source of value and meaning. We must learn to nurture our souls through activities that connect us with ourself, whether through creativity, nature, play, or simply being present in the moment. By doing so, we can start to free ourselves from the tyranny of productivity and find ways of living that are more authentic and fulfilling. Modern society plays a crucial role in the manipulation that pushes us to work tirelessly. From childhood, we are bombarded with messages that glorify hard work and warn us about the dangers of laziness. The institutions around us, schools, governments, corporations, are designed to shape our mindset in such a way that we accept work as an inevitable and honorable destiny. However, as Carl Jung argued, much of this narrative is a cultural construct that reinforces power structures and perpetuates a system of economic and emotional exploitation. The collective pressure to work begins in childhood, when we are taught that we must perform well in school to secure a good job in the future. Academic success becomes a reflection of future career success, and from an early age, we are conditioned to accept that our personal value is tied to our performance. Educational institutions, often funded or influenced by corporate interests, perpetuate the narrative that the only way to have a meaningful life is to be economically productive. As we grow, this pressure doesn't fade, it intensifies in the workplace. Competition is presented as a positive force, something that motivates us to strive harder and be better. However, this competition is also a tool of social control that divides workers and pushes them to compete against each other for limited resources, such as promotions or salary increases. Instead of working together to improve working conditions or seek a balance between work and personal life, employees find themselves trapped in an endless race where one person's success often means another's failure. Advertising and the media also play a significant role in perpetuating this narrative. We are bombarded with images of successful, productive people who seem to have it all: money, power, beauty. The narrative that if you work hard enough you can have it all is omnipresent, reinforcing the idea that life only has value if we manage to accumulate material wealth and visible success. This creates constant psychological pressure, as people feel compelled to work more to meet these impossible expectations. The manipulation by society is not always explicit. Often it is subtle and implicit. Economic and political systems are designed in such a way that people depend on work to survive. The lack of robust social safety nets, such as healthcare or unemployment insurance, means people have few options other than to work, even in unhealthy or unsatisfying conditions. This is a form of invisible control where the freedom of choice is merely an illusion. Although we are technically free to leave our jobs, the social and economic consequences of doing so are so severe that most people feel they have no other choice. Moreover, modern capitalism fosters the idea that our personal success is intrinsically linked to economic success. This belief reinforces the notion that we must work more, produce more, and consume more to be truly happy. Corporations and governments benefit from this cycle of production and consumption, as it keeps people trapped in a system that perpetuates economic and emotional inequality. People who do not fit into this model, those who do not work or are not productive according to society's standards, are marginalized and viewed as failures or lazy, further reinforcing the pressure to conform. For Carl Jung, the only way to escape this collective manipulation is through individuation. This means recognizing that our beliefs and behaviors are not always the result of conscious decisions, but are often shaped by social and cultural forces. By making these patterns conscious, we can begin to question the narratives that push us to work endlessly and seek ways of living that are more aligned with our true values and desires. Fortunately, Carl Jung not only identified the mechanisms that manipulate us into working, but also offered a path toward liberation, the process of individuation. For Jung, individuation is the process by which a person integrates all parts of themselves, their shadow, their complexes, and their conscious and unconscious desires, to become a whole and authentic being. This process is key to freeing ourselves from the invisible chains that bind us to work as a source of identity and value. The first step in individuation is becoming aware of how our beliefs about work have been shaped by society, culture, and the collective unconscious. Many people do not realize that their drive to work more and achieve more does not come from their own desires, but from external expectations that have been internalized over time. By recognizing that these beliefs are constructions, we can begin to question them and consciously decide whether we want to continue operating under their terms. A key component of individuation is confronting and integrating the shadow, the hidden aspects of our psyche that we have repressed or denied. In the context of work, the shadow often holds our unacknowledged desires for rest, leisure, and personal fulfillment beyond our professional lives. Society conditions us to place productivity above all else, leading many to suppress their needs for a more balanced, well-being-centered existence. Through the process of individuation, we can bring these neglected desires into the light and begin to integrate them into our daily lives. This journey also calls for a redefinition of success. Rather than equating our worth with material or financial achievements, Jung urges us to seek a success that resonates with our inner vocation, the calling of the soul. Vocation is not just a means of earning a living, it is a deep expression of who we are and what we value. For some, this may involve staying in their current job, but with a fresh perspective. For others, it could mean changing careers or even stepping away from traditional work to pursue activities that nourish the soul. Ultimately, individuation demands courage. The path to a truly authentic life is challenging, especially when societal pressures push us to conform. Yet, Jung believed that the reward of individuation is a life filled with greater balance, well-being, and personal fulfillment. By freeing ourselves from external expectations and tuning into our inner selves, we can discover ways of working that bring satisfaction without sacrificing our mental health, relationships, or connection with the self. Individuation is not a quick process, it is a lifelong journey. However, each step toward consciousness and authenticity brings us closer to a richer life, unburdened by the invisible forces that tie our identity to work. In the end, Jung offers a vision where work becomes not a burden or an obligation, but an expression of who we truly are. Carl Jung revealed that work is not just an economic necessity, but deeply embedded in our psyche and the collective unconscious. Through myths, archetypes, and societal complexes, we are subtly conditioned to accept work as a source of identity and value, often at the expense of our emotional and spiritual well-being. However, the process of individuation offers a path to liberation, helping us reconnect with our true selves and redefine our relationship with work. Breaking free from these unseen chains is a deeply personal journey, but one that leads to a more authentic, balanced, and meaningful life.